Welcome to You Decide. I'm your host, Errol Lewis, and we've got another bonus episode for you. Just a couple of days after talking with Andrew Cuomo, we got to sit down with the Democratic nominee for mayor of New York City, Zohran Mamdani, the man everybody's talking about. He just come back from Washington, D.C., and in fact had been attacked by the spokesperson for the President of the United States. A lot of interesting stuff that we got into. Enjoy the episode. Welcome back to the program. Good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me, Errol. Always a pleasure.
When I spoke to Andrew Cuomo earlier this week, your opponent, he said he is, quote, repulsed by your policy proposals because he thinks they're not realistic. And I know you've heard that before. I wanted you to hear part of that conversation and then get your reaction. Let's listen.
So these three-word slogans sound good, excellent on social media, but it's not reality, you know? And a little bit, I was too wed in responsibility and reality. You know, I would not say something that I couldn't get done.
What's your reaction to that?
Well, he said time and time again that he was going to win, and he couldn't get that done. So what we see from the governor in this moment is the fact that he's repulsed by an agenda to actually deliver for working people. In that same interview, which I saw, he compared tenants to hotel guests, and in doing so created a hierarchy within our own city when what we need is a mayor who understands the affordability crisis is impacting those tenants, those homeowners, everyone across the city, and will actually deliver on affordability for them. And when he was asked in an interview after he relaunched his campaign as to how he would deliver that affordability, he said he didn't know. And we know exactly how we're going to do it. We're going to do it by freezing the rent, by making buses fast and free, delivering universal childcare, and putting working people first in the nation's most expensive city.
And by the way, if you're not able to deliver, what is the consequence you're prepared to accept?
That I have not lived up to my word. I am making promises that I intend to keep, and I make them because I believe in our ability to deliver on them. Freezing the rent is something we've seen previous administrations do. Making buses fast and free is something we've seen a pilot of that I helped to win in New York City. And delivering universal childcare is something that could be done with the partnership, especially of a governor like the one we have today, who's been laser focused on the question of affordable childcare.
Okay, so now you've said a lot of negative things about Cuomo, and we heard he said some things about you. What are some positive things you think he achieved as governor?
You know, I think one of the positive things I would say was when he called me on election night, he spoke sincerely about what we had accomplished as a campaign, that we had spoken to young people, that we had brought more people into our political process, and that we had won the night. And he asked, would it be all right if he told everyone that we had this conversation, that he shared that with people? And I said, absolutely. And I said that I intended to unify our party in the weeks and months to come. That's what I've spent my time doing. And I appreciated the grace that he had in that conversation because I think it's something that has been missing in a lot of his political career. And I hope that one day he can return to that. Instead, what we're seeing in the resuscitation of a campaign that we defeated by more than 12 points is the same tired policies and proposals that New Yorkers decisively rejected about 3 weeks ago.
Okay, let me ask you about some of what went on during your conversation with some of the business leaders you met with. You had a couple of different business meetings, but it was reported that in at least one of those meetings, you said that you would discourage the use of the slogan, globalize the intifada. And I know you've been asked about this a million times. Let me just throw in my 2 cents. I was actually in Israel for the first time during the second intifada. It was a traumatic, horrible, violent time. You could see where storefronts had been blown out. You had to open your bags everywhere. There was a lot of tension. The streets were deserted, streets that were normally lively. We know, and it lasted for years, that thousands of people, both Palestinians and Israelis, died before they got some kind of a treaty to sort of dial back some of the violence. It was just a horrible, horrible time. And as you know, as you've heard, a lot of people are traumatized by that word. It brings back a lot of really, really bad memories. I was just a visitor, but there are people who have lived with much worse. Obviously, as part of your job as mayor, you would need to sort of dial back the temperature, bring people together. Where are we now in that conversation? And what else might you want to say about that particular phrase?
You know, Errol, I've thought about this quite a lot. And for some New Yorkers, this phrase is one that refers to civil disobedience and protest, a call to end the Israeli occupation of Palestinian land. But I know that for many Jewish New Yorkers, it brings to mind images of the like that you were speaking of. I was sitting with a rabbi not too long ago who told me how the same phrase is heard very differently by her. And it's heard as a reference to bus bombings in Haifa, restaurant attacks in Jerusalem, and it engenders a fear in her and in others of the possibility of those very attacks coming home here in New York City. And that distance between what some intend and what others hear is a bridge that is too far. And it is why I have not used the phrase, and it is why I discourage its use. And my focus is on building a movement for justice and equality. And as it pertains to Israel and Palestine, I think often of the words of Noy Katzman, who lost their brother in the horrific war crime of October 7th. And Noy said, we must believe in all life, Israeli and Palestinian, Jewish and Arab, that it is equally precious. And that is the vision that I hope to fulfill.
And if a particular phrase that might not be central to the conversation becomes a stumbling block, how would you, as the mayor of all New Yorkers, how would you sort of bridge or navigate that?
I think by refocusing on what has caused so many New Yorkers anguish, especially in this moment. You know, it was just a few months ago that I met a New Yorker in Brooklyn who told me of how more than 80 members of her family had been killed by the Israeli military in Gaza. This is a devastation that many New Yorkers are feeling personally. It's one that for others they are witnessing on a day-to-day basis, and it continues until today. You know, just last week, NBC News reported that the Israeli military bombed a health clinic in Gaza, killing 10 children, including a 1-year-old who had just uttered his first words hours before. We are speaking of a place that is now home to the greatest number of child amputees in modern history. And what offends so many in our city, this horror, is one that is subsidized by our country. And it is something that I know has been of concern for New Yorkers, even during the presidential election when I went to Hillside Avenue and Fordham Road. I heard not just about a desire for cheaper groceries and a cost of living that was easier to navigate, but also for an end to our tax dollars paying for the killing of children. And Donald Trump exploited that despair only to heighten it with policies that have intensified this horror, be it in Gaza or elsewhere. And what it behooves us as Democrats to do is not just speak up in opposition to these policies and these decisions, but also for a vision of the world where international law is not simply an aspiration, but a reality, and where we understand there is no hierarchy for all of God's children.
Okay, let me shift our conversation to Washington, D.C. You were in the Capitol yesterday meeting with congressional Democrats. Today, the White House press secretary, you probably heard about this, name checked you a little bit. She was asked about your candidacy, and she had a little trouble with your name, took a shot at you at the same time. Let's listen to that.
He absolutely does not want to see Mamdani elected, who is a known communist who supports the abolishment of private property, the defunding of police. He has made very well-known anti-Semitic statements. It would be a disaster for New York and for this country. And I think it's quite telling that this individual, a known communist, has been spending time in Washington this week meeting with leaders on Capitol Hill.
You got a lot to pick from there. They said known communist. She said it twice. Any piece of that you want to respond to?
Well, she's speaking about Mamdani, and my name is Zohran Mamdani.
Okay, right, wrong guy.
It may be another guy that comes to her mind. You know, I've been very clear about the fact that I'm not a communist. I'm a democratic socialist, and what that means is living up to the words of Dr. King from decades ago, that call it democracy or call it democratic socialism, there must be a better distribution of wealth for all of God's children in this country. And what offends the press secretary and the White House administration is not who I am, but who I'm fighting for. Because it is the very working class Americans that administration claimed to fight for that they have now since betrayed with the passage of legislation just last week that continues in their history of wealth transfers of trillions of dollars from the working class of this country to the 1%, all while taking millions of Americans off of their health care and stealing food from the hungry.
Is the mispronunciation of your name a calculated act of disrespect, do you think?
I think there is an element of that, especially when it's repeated.
Okay. Let me follow up on something my colleague Bernadette Hogan had tried to ask you about. New York has had mayoral control of the school system for more than 20 years. Overall, do you think it's been a success? And if you become the mayor, do you want to have sole control over who becomes the chancellor?
I think there are elements of it that have been advancements from what we've had in the past. My vision of it is not to return to something prior than mayoral control. Rather, it is to address the critiques that I've heard over many years about a lack of involvement of educators, of parents, of students, and an inability for the mayor to build a coalition, not simply for those same New Yorkers to see themselves in these policies, but also in executing these policies. And so I would look to build upon it by finding ways for greater involvement of those same New Yorkers who are such a critical part of our education system.
Now, you don't want to assume that involvement means everyone will support your policies, right? I mean, this is a quarter of the city budget, and this is, 1 million kids, meaning you're going to get at least 2 million opinions from their parents, right? So what do you do with that? I mean, in the end, who gets the final say? Because yes, there's hearings on everything. There's rent guidelines board. There's all kinds of hearings about lots of things. So a lot of voices are heard. But in the end, who makes the decision?
In the end, no matter what happens in New York City, it is the mayor that bears the ultimate responsibility for that. And I'll give you one example. When you think about PEP, the panel, in that panel, the mayor has a majority of appointee authority. And oftentimes the mayor looks at that as if there is no need for them to engage with any of the other appointments, assuming that they are all uniformly in opposition, when in reality, those appointments come from a variety of individuals, from a variety of elected officials. Those are people who could also be part of a coalition. What does it look like to ensure that you are required to work together with more than just those that you've appointed? When it comes to education, where we've seen the failure of that, that could create more buy-in and more delivery of that same vision.
That sounds like a suggestion that some of their decisions out of the PEP panels would be binding. Is that what you're getting?
I think some of it would also include going beyond the automatic majority of mayoral appointees. And I've seen this as something that the union has also advocated for in the past, is a changing of the composition of the board. And I haven't made any commitments as to, the exact nature of what this policy will look like, but these are the things I'm interested in to go beyond that which we have had.
And just to be clear, you would appoint the chancellor?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's talk about the police. Your critics, including Andrew Cuomo, say that you want to defund the police. We've heard the sitting mayor, Eric Adams, say a lot about that as well. Do you want to see the patrol size shrink, grow, stay the same? What's your assessment of where things are now and of the performance of the current commissioner?
This is one of the few things that Andrew Cuomo clearly has in common with the press secretary of the Trump administration, where they continue to repeat lies about my policies because it's harder to actually contend with what I've put forward in this mayoral campaign. I will not defund the police. I have not been running on defunding the police. I've said time and again, I will sustain the headcount of the police department, and that I see the police as a critical partner in creating public safety. And what I have heard from rank and file police officers, as well as from police officers higher up, is a frustration with how we have asked the police department to respond to nearly every failure of the social safety net. We have tasked officers who signed up to take on serious crime to instead respond to 200,000 mental health calls a year. And I believe that we need to allow police officers to take on those serious crimes, and we can do that by ensuring that we hire mental health professionals to do the work of mental health professionals. And with regards to the current commissioner, Commissioner Tisch, I've said that I'm considering retaining Commissioner Tisch. I've said this for many months, and in part because of an appreciation of the swift and decisive action that she took to uproot corruption in the upper echelons of the NYPD. Now, we know that there is more corruption to be uprooted in that same department. We know that that is a result of Eric Adams' leadership. And we've also seen that crime has been dropping, and that we continue to need to do more work to ensure that we increase the clearance rates within the department, which in the first quarter of this year were at 35%. And I believe that we can increase them by creating the Department of Community Safety, where we ask police to do less so that they can deliver more.
Okay, let's talk politics for a minute. A lot of national political analysts are trying to see your primary victory in a sort of a larger sense, suggesting that you and your issues and the way and the reasons that you won could be a roadmap for the future of the Democratic Party. There was even a special election for Congress in Arizona this week, where some people were trying to say that it was a referendum on you somehow. I'm not sure I bought that one, but that's what the discussion is. How much of your win is simply about you and the situation here in New York politics, or do you agree that there's something out there that the larger party should see as maybe either a roadmap or an indication of where the national party might be going?
I was equally perplexed by some of the attempts
Never been to Arizona, right?
to impose the narrative of this race all across the country. I will say that there are a number of things that our campaign achieved that have answered some of the questions that we have been getting posed about our party. And some of them have to do with the engagement and involvement of young people. What we saw in this election was a number of young people coming out to vote, the likes of which we haven't seen in a long time in New York City. According to the New York Times, the 3 age groups that voted at the highest rates were all under the age of 35. We managed to register more than 30,000 new voters in the last 10 days. In 2021, that was at 3,000. So much of the work of protecting our democracy is not just fighting back against authoritarianism. It's increasing our faith in its ability to deliver on the needs of working people. And we can only see that if those people see themselves in those policies and they vote. And that's what's excited me, is a roadmap to bring more young people into our politics, a roadmap also to bring more new immigrants into our politics. Because as you've written about, and I've so appreciated the coverage of something which often goes ignored, we also saw an increase in turnout among so many South Asian and Muslim New Yorkers who for so long have been treated by consultants as New Yorkers who simply will not come to vote, when in fact, we haven't given them a vision of what to vote for.
Is that theory, is that strategy going to play through to November, or should we expect you to go out and register a lot more voters and go back to some of these same groups and increase their size?
We are going to build on what we've achieved. You know, on election day, I had a young man on a motorbike come up to me with about 2 hours left. He took off his helmet and he said, "I was told I can only vote in presidential elections." I said, "That's not true. If you're registered, you can vote in any." And so we looked up his registration. He was a Republican. He couldn't vote for me in the primary. Now, I hope you'll vote for me in the general, and I know that there are many others who are the same. They are attracted to a vision of a city that they can actually afford, no matter what party they belong to. So we're going to speak to the same voters, but go beyond that. Speak to voters who voted for Andrew Cuomo, those who didn't vote at all, and register new voters as well.
Will it be as nimble and use this sort of same door knocking and other kind of street campaigns? Because I'm watching you pick up all of these endorsements from all of these unions who are on the other side and lost in the primary, and I'm thinking, you might get bogged down if you've got all of these different groups, the Brooklyn Party Organization and the Manhattan Party Organization and all of these big unions.
You know what unites all of them is that everybody can knock doors. And I'm excited to do it because we knocked on 1.6 million doors with 52,000 volunteers. We've already seen that number skyrocket since the primary. And we're going to see a door knocking operation that doesn't just rival what we did, but surpass it.
Okay. We will see you out on the campaign trail. Thanks so much for coming by. Great to see you.
Thank you so much.
If you want to keep up with what's happening in New York politics and hear more conversations with the people shaping the future of New York and beyond, subscribe to our channel. And let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, elections, and issues that matter to you.